Do we have any apologies for our absence?
Good morning, members. We have apologies from Councillor McInnes and Councillor Gray.
Thank you. Yeah, this meeting will be recorded for minuting and note-taking purposes. I forgot to mention that. Members, you're asked to consider whether you have an interest to declare in relation to any item on the agenda for this meeting. Any declarations of interest? Nope, that's grand. Okay, we'll move on to item 3, the minutes of the previous meeting. Has anybody got any notes or comments on the minutes? Or can we agree the minutes? No comments, so we can take that as a true record. Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, that takes us to item 4, the faster project EV charging infrastructure, and we have a presentation from Gemma Robinson from Highlands. So if we could just move on to that now, Gemma, that would be lovely. Thank you.
Yep, good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me today. I'll just share a short presentation with you. Can you see that okay?
Yes, that's lovely and clear.
Yes, it's here.
So my name's Gemma Robinson. I'm the project officer at Highlands for Faster. Faster is funded by the Interreg 5A programme and match funded by Transport Scotland, and it stands for Facilitating a Sustainable Transition to EVs in the Regions. So it's mostly involved with the infrastructure, mostly helping people to adopt EV uptake and to help with climate change as well. The regions within the project, there's 3 of them. We have Northern Ireland, the border counties of Ireland and Scotland. And within Scotland, there are 3 regions as well. So we have the Western Isles, Skye, Loch Arbour and Loch Alsh within the Highlands, and Argyll and Bute, excluding Helensburgh. The main deliverables of the project are to install 73 rapid or journey public chargers, so 50 kilowatt chargers, and those will charge an electric vehicle within about half an hour. There are 24 allocated for Scotland, and that will be 8 in each of the 3 Scottish council areas. The other main deliverable for the Faster project is collaboration. Because EV infrastructure is such a rapidly growing technology and industry, there are an awful lot of variations in terms of what's available and in the setups of different regions. So it's been really interesting to learn from our partners across the water. The site selection for the Faster project has mainly been done by our research partner, the Power Network Demonstration Centre at the University of Strathclyde. They have analysed network gaps, demand projection for the next 5 years, and then combined those with community suggestions from the councils. That gave us a long list to work with, which we whittled down by looking at electrical capacity analysis, doing site visits at various locations just to see if that brought up any concerns, and looking at land ownership in the areas that were identified as suitable or needing a EV charger. The site shortlist that we are working to, we're very happy with. It is still subject to budgeting and supplier approval. We're hoping to appoint a supplier in about March. So for the Highlands, there are 4 council sites, and those are in Fort William, Ballachulish, Mallig and Portree. There were some areas identified in the site selection process where there wasn't any suitable council land for an EV charger, a public EV charger. So that's when we started looking at private collaboration, and we identified some of the larger and particularly visible car parks to work with them. So the areas we're looking at private sites for are Glenfinnan, Arrowsig, Strontian and Loch Allen. We're delighted to have had the support of Kate Forbes from the start of the project, and she's shown an interest in seeing how the project progresses. The project goes through to May 2023. And that's everything. I don't know if anyone has any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gemma. I could start with one. Highland, do you only have Skye and Loch Harbour? What about the rest of Highland?
Unfortunately, because it's an Interreg VA project, sorry, 5A project, because it's all about that border region with Ireland, it was only the north and west of Scotland that could be included within this project. Obviously, as Hightrans, we would look to include the whole of the Highlands, but for this particular project, we didn't have a say on that.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you. I have some questions from members now. Maybe could take your screen down, please.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be good. Biz, Councillor Campbell, please.
Is there another provider in Skye and Loch Alsh, as well as you? I've got one opposite my house, a shoe shop, and the owner of the shop said the queue up there waiting for the one charger. You know, in the summertime it's chaotic.
Yeah.
So can they get more than one in the one area, the one place?
Okay, Gemma, I think that's the question.
Sorry.
Yes, Gemma.
I think for our particular project, so this project was started in 2019, and because it's funded in the way that it is, Interreg 5A programme, it means we've got the chance to cover some network gaps, particularly in the quieter areas of the region that might not, kind of costs might normally be prohibitive for infrastructure there. We have spaced out the EV chargers on this project to try and give a good network coverage as well. I know there are more chargers wanted kind of everywhere. There's a queue at most of them, I think, and it's just the challenge that we're facing at the moment to try and get those in quickly enough, and this is just obviously part of that solution.
Councillor Bruce, please.
Thank you, Chair. Will these chargers that you're putting in work on all EVs? I understand that some EVs have different connections. Could you give me more information on that?
Yes, so the EVs do have different connections. There's 3 general ones that are used in the UK. The rapid chargers that we're putting in will have the 2 50 kilowatt outputs. So nearly every car can use those 2. The only ones that use the 3rd type of socket, it's actually being phased out, and we're hoping to put some additional ones in, if budget allows, with those sockets on. But in general, the rapid chargers that we're putting in will cover the vast majority of vehicles that are available.
Thank you, Councillor Rickson.
Thank you very much, Chair. Hello, Gemma. Thank you for the presentation. At the risk of incurring the wrath of my chair, may I just say how welcome those charging points are in Loch Harbour. I noticed that you have 3 on the road to the Isles, Glenfinnan, Arrowsig and Malloch. I couldn't help smiling when you talked about the quieter areas of the region. The road to the Isles is phenomenally busy in the summer. We have something like 380,000 visitors to a small village at Glenfinnan of 100 people pre-pandemic. So the numbers are absolutely huge. And what I would say is don't underestimate demand in the future on these areas, because we are within 3.5 hours of Glasgow, and we do get, even in the pandemic, a great number of visitors. The only other thing I would say is, and I welcome greatly what you've done, is that new technologies sometimes seem to get off rather slowly, and then suddenly they develop a breakneck speed and we've moved straight into them. We've seen that time and time again, whether it's the change from tape recorders to, 5.5-inch discs, 1/4-inch discs to floppy drives, etc., etc., etc. And I think this will happen with electric cars too. So I think we have to be as responsive as we can be, but thank you very much for your part, High Trans's part, in providing these in Loch Harbour. And I hand you back to the chair with a wry smile. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dennis. Councillor Bush, you wanted to come back with another question?
Yes, the 50 kilowatt charging time, 50 kilowatt chargers, how long will it take to charge up the average car? Is 50 kilowatts fairly fast or what?
Yeah, 50 kilowatts is classed as a rapid charger, and they will charge the majority of cars within 30 to 40 minutes, up to 80% charge. And for a journey charger, most people will charge up to about 80%. They don't need to go right to that 100% because that's the slower section of charging. So 30 to 40 minutes for these particular chargers. And just to come back to you, Dennis, thank you very much. That road from out to Mallaig from Glenfinnan was identified as a particular route that needed them, and apologies for the quieter comment. Perhaps meaning more of a rural location, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Gemma. There's no more questions, but we look forward to having a few more in there. We're part of the Skye Loch Harbour area, it's still part of the North Coast 500, and we had excellent publicity there on how it being the place to go with your EV for your holiday. So let's hope we can make sure that there's no delays, and particularly at Shield Bridge there, where Councillor Campbell mentioned earlier. Thank you, Gemma, for your attendance, and thanks for bringing that to us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, members, we now move on to improving the energy efficiency of council housing in Highland, and Brian Cameron is going to present this report for us today. Brian, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I've been asked to present a paper here in regard to the energy efficiency in council housing. So bear with us. I've just got a few slides if I can share with members. Bear with us. Can members see that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I'll just talk for a few minutes, and then it's probably one of these issues which maybe lends itself to a lot of discussion in regard to the questions that might arise. So just to give a bit of context to it, when the Scottish Housing Quality Standard was introduced more than a decade ago, the council had over 16,000 energy efficiency failures when measured up against the energy rating specified then. That led to a number of years where there was unprecedented investment in the Housing Revenue Account capital programme to reach compliance, and we achieved compliance back in 2015 in regard to that. Even then, there was 9% of council houses weren't compliant with the energy efficiency part of the quality standard. That was where tenants had opted out of energy efficiency works, particularly heating upgrades, and that's something which the Scottish Government allowed as part of council discretion in regard to that. The Scottish Government, of course, after the quality standard was reached, they immediately introduced a new energy efficiency standard for social housing, which superseded the SHQS requirements, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Our Housing Revenue Account capital programme in the last few years has really been focused on a number of different issues. One of the things from members and tenants and officers as well, one of the feedback from the quality standard works was that they wanted to focus on different aspects of work which didn't really feature in the Scottish Housing Quality Standards, so the likes of window and door improvements, environmental works, estate improvement works, that type of thing. And the programme since then has focused on a number of different elements. Capital plan is largely based on life cycle approach to our stock. So that's the likes of bathrooms, kitchens, windows, doors, heating systems, looking at replacing the oldest elements within our stock, also looking at it on a condition basis. The capital plan has really prioritised local member and tenant opinion. Area committees have final approval over the projects that's taken place over the last few years, and that's allowed members to have the kind of discretion to prioritise certain works over other works, and that's maybe something we can maybe talk about later on today as to how that fits in with a more asset management approach towards improving the energy efficiency of our stock. The level of investment has been deemed affordable in terms of rent levels. Last week, Housing and Property Committee approved a 1% rent increase for tenant rents. That's well below inflation. It's also a lot lower than a lot of other councils in Scotland and also housing associations. So it's very much a level of investment deemed affordable to our tenants. Part of the problem with that, however, is that the green investment, energy efficiency investment, is only around about 60% of our annual programme. So that's about 40% of our capital programme every year, which goes towards the likes of estate improvement, adaptations on medical grounds, bathrooms, kitchens, that type of things. The energy efficiency works themselves, a lot of them have been more focused on maintaining existing stock. So that's where heating systems have been getting to the end of the life cycle, maybe 15 years or more for boilers, that type of thing, rather than kind of looking towards more net zero outcomes. In terms of national context, members of the group will probably be aware of the net zero requirements and some of the interim targets. Social housing is definitely deemed to be intended to lead the way when it comes to this. There's a 2038 target for all public buildings, including council housing stock. DEISH, that's the energy efficiency standard for social housing. So that's the Scottish Government target. So that was set nationally for the end of December in 2020. And Highland, we're 74.6% compliant with that, although 5.9% of our stock is also exempt because of technical or social exemptions. The social exemptions are where tenants have opted out of works. The technical exemptions are where the works can't take place because of the nature of the property. Maybe it's not suitable for external wall insulation, that type of thing. I suspect that when we do some more analysis, the percentage of technical exemptions is probably higher than that with some of our older stock. There's an energy efficiency standard 2 target that's set for 2032, and that again raises the standard in terms of domestic housing. There's a review of that nationally. The Scottish Government's announced that, and that's going to commence in February. Highland are going to sit in a local authority working group and are going to be involved in some of the future recommendations there for changing the standards. So again, it's been quite difficult from an asset management point of view with some of the change in targets here, and again, that might be something we might want to discuss about. In terms of the challenges, I included in my report, the Scottish Government commissioned a Zero Emissions Social Housing Task Force, or ZEST. They came up with a number of recommendations nationally, and I think some of the issues Highland that we face, I know there's some particular issues, particularly the amount of off-gas heating and the age of and location of some of our stock, but some of the issues are also national as well. Big problems at the minute in the construction industry. They've struggling in terms of capacity. The skill set of engineers has improved over the years when it comes to renewable heating installs, and also the capacity and skills to deal with insulation contracts, that type of thing. But there's still probably a gap there in terms of deliverability, particularly if social landlords and the owners and private landlords increase the amount of energy efficiency works they want to do in the coming years. With the pandemic, there's been a lot of problems with material shortages. There's been longer lead-in times, which has led to delays in all types of work. Some of the issues I've mentioned there, heat pumps, windows, long lead-in times in terms of getting that type of work delivered. Utility companies, generally speaking, we're probably looking at least 3 months now to change some of the meters. So that's something which is out with our control as such, but again, it just leads to longer lead-in times for the work to take place. A lot more tenant liaison work needing done there, a lot more project management input as well. In terms of off-gas heating options, well, amongst other things, I'm speaking to colleagues elsewhere in Scotland this week. They're struggling where a lot of tenants are refusing renewable options in favour of wanting to keep solid fuel fires, wood burning stoves, that type of thing. They don't score as high when it comes to energy efficiency, but certainly our experience in Highland has been a lot of tenants want to keep their solid fuel option. I've mentioned there the future of gas heating. Again, in the kind of net zero future, gas heating will have to go at some stage in the future. As to what the replacement for it might be, there's been some discussion nationally and locally about maybe a blended hydrogen model. Again, it's going to cost a huge amount of investment and a huge amount of work to get there. And I've mentioned there as well support for tenants. Whatever work we do that involves change, it involves a lot of tenant liaison when it comes to delivering works. I was at a tenant forum last week, the Highland Tenant Forum, and the tenant representatives across Highland, generally speaking, their feedback is very positive. They want to go green as such, but they're perhaps a wee bit wary about the cost implications when it comes to them and what it might mean for tenant rents. And I've highlighted there that probably the biggest challenge is the affordability of all this. There's not been much external funding over the last few years. Costs of work have increased in the pandemic. So, for example, our last tender when it came to air source heat pump replacement, we're talking about £18,000 per unit. And it's very difficult to get a huge volume of works when that unit cost is so high. The immediate requirement would be that we would need to look at increasing tenant rents to meet the net zero agenda over the years. There hasn't been much external funding, and that's maybe something, a lobbying issue the council might want to do in due course. The Scottish Federation of Housing Associations, they did a really good paper last summer, which I've referenced in my paper. They estimated it would cost £2 billion to bring housing association stock up to some of the new energy efficiency standards. One of their concerns was that they didn't think it would actually make a massive difference to some of their tenants when it came to fuel poverty. And this is one of the wider questions in terms of, can energy efficiency works reduce fuel poverty as much as we would all like? And my last slide here, I hope I haven't come across as too negative when I'm discussing some of the challenges here. There's also really good opportunities here in terms of how we shape our capital programme and our investment in due course. I've commissioned Changeworks, their environmental agency, to do analysis of Highland stock. So they're going to do a modelling exercise. They're underway in terms of doing that and should have it finished in March. And that's all about modelling what works might be required to meet future energy standards, what some of those estimated costs might be, what the potential impact might be on tenant fuel bills. Again, very difficult at present because the energy market's in such a state of flux at the minute, and energy prices have gone up massively inside the last 3 months, never mind the last year or more. And there's an element to it where whatever energy works we do almost feels like they kind of mitigate the worst of some of the fuel bill increases. There needs to be further discussion in terms of policy changes. I mentioned there about tenant opt-outs. Every day we get tenants opting out of works and contracts. Some of it is because they don't want to get rid of their solid fuel fire. Some of it is because they don't want the awkwardness or the inconvenience of change. Some of it is purely because they don't want council officers working in their house. There's also the choice of heating systems. I mentioned that before, and what's the best option, particularly in off-gas areas. Should we prioritise external wall insulation a bit more? Traditionally, we've always tried to do that across Highland, but it is quite disruptive. It's not particularly popular with tenants. It usually involves quite a lot of work when it comes to owner-occupier engagement, and owners may be refusing to pay their share of works and mixed tenure block, that type of thing. We want to do some more trials in 2022 of internal wall insulation, which again we've shied away from over the years simply because of the level of disruption to our tenants and the amount of additional costs there in terms of making good decoration, that type of thing. And a big question in terms of should we prioritise energy efficiency works ahead of other works? Should we look at delaying works in bathrooms and kitchens rather than doing energy works? And of course, there's the whole investment discussion there, which will of course need to be discussed in terms of future reports to Housing and Property Committee, how we afford the works, and should there be further lobbying nationally at a UK level as well in terms of what funding is needed to carry out the works. So quite a few challenges there. Obviously, some big decisions which may need to come back both to this group and also to future Housing and Property Committee. And I'm more than happy to take questions from members in terms of some of the issues raised today and to take that back and do a bit of more detailed analysis on it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. It's very obvious that it will come across as negativity with the scale of the challenge ahead of you. But I have a few questions on your report. The first thing is you've presented us with figures about the energy efficiency failures in Highland. I believe they're from 2007. Do we have something a bit more up to date than that? I would just like to ask if Highland had noticed that the council had actually declared a climate change emergency in 2019, because you still seem to be working towards national targets. There doesn't seem to be any movement towards the council's own target. Are you addressing the climate change issues and upgrading houses when they are voids? Because I think a lot of progress could be made at that particular point. And I think I had one more. Yes, heat pumps. What sort of tenant feedback are we getting on those who have already taken on heat pumps? Because I've heard some negativity about it recently. And that would be the ones from me. I don't know if you want to address them before you go on to the members. I have 3 members with questions. Maybe we'll take those ones first.
I'm happy to take the questions, Chair, and go on to the DARA queries. In terms of current standards, I suppose it reflects where there's been different change in national standards at different times. So the requirements of the Scottish Housing Quality Standard and the energy ratings, which had to be met there by different fuel types against energy ratings, they've changed over the years as such. So in terms of the current energy efficiency standard, we're 74.5% compliant with that. So that's where we are currently in terms of compliance against national standards. You mentioned the climate change emergency, and yeah, I completely agree with yourself in regard to that, and I think that's the question for the group here in Housing and Property Committee. If we want to move towards tackling future climate change, we're going to need to have some serious political decisions as to what the priority of our works will be, what the priority of our investment is, and how much investment we want to make towards it. And again, I'd be guided as an officer in terms of what that might look like. I think the change works analysis, which will be presented to a future Housing and Property Committee, will really demonstrate and give some good evidence in terms of the scale of the challenge there, and also the scale of the future investment which we need to do in terms to meet that kind of climate change agenda, as opposed to what we're doing at the minute, which is probably maintaining our stock, but not going above a certain investment level and making the hard decisions needed to get to what I would call meeting the climate change requirements. In terms of voids, we do replacement energy efficiency works at voids where possible. Again, what we is trying to balance some of the issues here. The longer you leave a property void to do energy works, the longer time someone spends on the waiting list waiting to be allocated that property. As such, the more void rental loss we get, that scenario. For example, I was told yesterday of 3 cases in Highland where new heating systems are going in at void. They've been delayed in our couple of weeks because we can't get the utility company to change the meter in, so that's delaying that, and that's got the knock-on impact to a tenant or an applicant on our waiting list who are basically having to wait longer before they move in. They're having to wait longer before they pay rent. So again, that might be a policy decision we could make where, as a council, we're okay to leave void relet times to be longer as such if we do more energy work at that stage. One of the things in terms of the internal wall insulation trial is to see how quickly we could do that type of work, which is really disruptive to a tenant who you're talking about. Maybe they could possibly even need to be out of their property for the best part of 5 days. It could be we can make a policy decision where at as many voids as possible, we do that work at the void stage. But of course, that's going to extend the void period. So again, interested to see what members might feel in terms of that. In terms of heat pumps, I think there's been a bit of a generational change. When they were first installed, going back to about 2005, it felt like they were kind of relatively untried new technology. It feels like we've passed by that stage. Tenant feedback generally has been very good in the last few years. Officer feedback's been good as well. They seem to be relatively reliable. They don't seem to break down as much as the early kind of forms of heat pumps were as such. So generally good feedback there. I have commissioned a little bit of work as well, just in terms of the energy advisors going into one of our recent projects and trying to get that feedback from tenants and also analysis of their fuel bills at the end of the first couple of quarters of having the heat pumps in, just to make sure that they're working well. Speaking to an energy advisor who works nationally as well as in Highland, I was speaking to them on Tuesday, and they were saying that kind of feedback in Highland seems to be what's happening across Scotland. But again, I think the more heat pumps we install, the more houses we go into, the increased volume does bring about a little bit of risk in terms of the need for increased tenant lease and increased support for our tenants, increased energy advice to help them through that process. I trust that answers all those queries.
Thanks, Brian. I will move on to members now. Councillor Fraser, please.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. You're not being negative at all. You're being realistic. You've answered a fair number of questions there. If I put this onto a UK context, the Climate Change Committee in October 2021 said for the UK to become carbon neutral is going to cost 1.4 trillion. So if we had, as Scotland, 10% of that cost, is at a guess. And then you just did, these are sort of figures I'm looking on the back of a post-it note. But that, I'm sure other people pick up on that. But what I will say, and I've raised this at the Housing and Property Committee, it's in point 4.3 on page 7. It says a problem of tenant opt-outs. The problem isn't with the tenant opting out, it's an affordability opt-out, because if you asked the majority of tenants, do you want to be green, do you want to be energy efficient, do you want to get with this program, they will say yes. But if you turn around to them and say, oh, by the way, it's going to cost you 3 times your monthly electricity bill to do it, then they'll go, oh, I can't afford that. And many of our tenants, and I've raised this before, and I think you may have commented as well, Brian, is that they're not on, many of them are not on large incomes. Many of them are on benefits or on fixed incomes. And if we're looking to bring them up to date, which they would like to, if they can't afford it, we are giving them an unfair burden that really needs to be addressed both at the council level and at a Scottish level, because at the end of the day, energy is reserved to Westminster. So a lot of the issues that are coming through are out with much of our control, because it's controlled at Westminster, but that's a different discussion. I think, and I've asked before, it's on 6.1 on page 9, tenant fuel bills. Now I'm going to be speaking to Changeworks probably later this month on renewable heat incentive, but it's on private properties, which is a completely different discussion and a different problem. But I've always asked, we need to compare kilowatt hour running costs on the different systems that we're putting forward, because that is the crucial thing. It's the running cost. And I've seen some of the new heat pumps. They're twice the size of the old ones, but they're basically silent. So a lot of some of the negativity about sound and that, but they really are efficient. But it's the running cost all the time, and with incomes being squeezed and the potential of a 50% increase in electricity costs, and the majority of our tenants are in electric only houses, this is where I have real concern. Not the fact that people want to be energy efficient and climate change approvers. They want to know that they're going to be able to afford what they would like to do. So it's a desirable as opposed to an essential. Essential, how am I going to pay for this? Desirable, of course I would like to do that. So I'll leave it there before I start waffling on. But thank you, Brian. You've got a difficult task. But the last thing I was going to say in the recommendations for the ZEST, there's a couple of words there which don't help. But I would have put a 9th recommendation, affordability cost per kilowatt hour per tenant. But I'll leave it at that. Thank you for letting me run on a bit there, Trish. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Loudon, please.
I always think it's a good thing to let Councillor Fraser run on a bit, because not only do you learn stuff, but you also are aware that some concern has been shown for the people we're supposed to be here to help, and he's demonstrated that again. Yeah, I think my concerns are probably similar, but I'll come at it from, as I often do, from a slightly different angle. I think there's a danger that we see climate change as coming at a cost, but all of the technologies don't necessarily cost more. Some of the technologies are actually self-financing. So, if you're looking at things like solar PV or solar thermal, those are going to save tenants money. If those panels are fitted, they can produce electricity for a fraction of what electricity companies are charging our tenants. So, in a similar way to what Craig was saying, I think we have to look at each technology and find out what it's going to cost in capital terms and in revenue terms. And if the capital cost is relatively low and there's a big revenue saving, that technology is paid for itself. There's no reason why that shouldn't be rolled out. It isn't actually costing anything. We have to borrow the money to set it up, but it's paid for in the reduction in bills to the tenant. So that's something that we could do for them from day one. Some of the other technologies are more expensive, and you're quite right there, and that is going to be difficult. The things that Craig has drawn attention to, Brian in the paper is talking about, do we put the rent up to cover the cost? Really, in the present set of circumstances, that is incredibly difficult to think of doing at a time when tenants are already under so much pressure. So, I think, can we find the technologies that are not going to cost us anything to install because of the saving that it gives to the tenants? And can we find a way of, can we find a model to roll this out much more quickly? Apart from that, some of the technologies, air source and ground source, are relying on a higher standard of insulation. They'll only work efficiently if the home is properly insulated. So it's great to hear there's studies going on, trials going on to look at internal insulation. I think it's a really good thing. And the last thing, I don't know whether we've talked about batteries at all, but certainly, can we generate the power and can we store it? How economically viable is that? And the absolute last thing, do we have a hierarchy? Are we getting, are we looking at houses that maybe are not well glazed or well insulated and are coal fired? Can we look at the how is the heat being generated in our tenants' homes at the moment? So if they're using coal, is it a priority to tackle that? If those homes are coal fired and single glazed and uninsulated, can we get them up to the top? I had the same street that I was talking about before. I think Fountain Road. I had another tenant approach me, concerned for a relative living in one of those homes. So again, how are we going to prioritise the investment, and will we aim at tackling those three things at once? So is it coal fired? Is it properly insulated, and is it properly set up? And will the change be affordable? I know I've rambled a bit there, Trish, but I hope all the points I was raising were relative and sensible.
Yes, they are, and particularly on coal-fired, Derek. I think if people are so resistant to moving from having the solid fuel, maybe we should be considering giving them wood burning, so that we just at least remove them from the coal. Councillor Ricks, and then I'll come back to you, Brian. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. And firstly, Brian, thank you for your report. I do agree with what Councillor Fraser has said. I don't regard it as negative. I regard it as realistic. It is a fairly sobering realism, but we have to be honest with people, and I appreciate the length to which you've gone to spell out some of the issues. 2 points, if I could. 5.11, ensuring that energy efficiency works mitigate fuel poverty rather than exacerbate it. I think that's a really tricky point, but absolutely critical. We've got to make sure we improve the situation for our tenants in terms of fuel poverty. And the second one was in connection with 6.1, which is the study you have commissioned from Change Works. I think this is absolutely critical, because at the end of the day, we need to quantify this problem. We need to know exactly what is being talked about in terms of the totality of the issue, how much it's going to cost, and how we're going to tackle it. So I really approve of that. Many thanks indeed, Chair.
Thank you, Dennis. Brian, if you want to see comments or to answer any of the questions that were hidden in that large preambles that went on there.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I think some really good comments being made by all three members there. In terms of what Councillor Fraser said, just to clarify, probably around about 63%, 64% of our council tenants are on some form of universal credit or housing benefit. So that's a affordability issue there. We do historically, the tenants who historically have been in rent arrears over the years are usually low income, what would be defined, and hopefully no one takes offence at this, as the kind of working poor. So they're in kind of low income jobs, they're really struggling, they don't qualify for benefits, but they don't have a lot of disposable income, and that really, they really struggle with the likes of fuel costs. In terms of tariffs, if it's an electric tariff, which will be for even new streamlined quantum storage heaters or air source heat pumps, electric tariffs have gone way up over the last few years. And again, that's a huge affordability issue. There was a mention there about air source heat pumps. Yeah, I think when we first installed 15 years or more ago, there was an issue about the volume of them and the kind of the sound they made. That seems that as new designs and new specifications have come in over the years, they are relatively quieter as such. In terms of Councillor Loudon's question about solar panels, we do try and install them where possible. Again, I suppose it's that question asked to, and a little bit like, I think Councillor Loudon touched on this as well with the kind of whole house approach. It's far better doing the whole house approach and doing insulation work and solar panels and a new system all at the same time. Again, it gets into that affordability side of things. And the more houses we do the whole house approach to, the less money there is to do more houses in neighbouring streets, and the less money there is to do bathrooms, kitchens, and other works. So that's some of the kind of discussion that we need to take on board in due course. We already try and prioritise the likes of the solid fuel systems, the lowest performing properties. Again, it's a lot of them to do in Highland, and again, I think we touched on this before, the deliverability of the work. Going back to whenever we had huge investment programmes for the energy efficiency standard, I personally was quite uncomfortable with that period of time. There was a lot of really big projects, a lot of contractors were brought in from out with Highland. What we've been doing the last few years is really focusing on building maintenance. Local depots, can they do the work if at all possible? If they can't do it, local firms trying to build up those local subcontractors to do the work. They care more about it, they're locally based, trying to, as long as they're competitive in terms of the pricing or whatever. So all that type of thing. And I think generally speaking, the feedback from our tenants has been the smaller locally based projects work far better in terms of quality of service, quality of installation, that type of thing. If we're talking about delivering more massive scale investment, that's going to really stretch the Highland construction industry, and it's going to probably, if we do need to call on bigger firms from out with Highland, then that gets into the whole question of how we monitor their work and make sure the quality is up to standard. So I think that's something that we really need to bear in mind with however we decide in terms of future investment. And just to focus on Councillor Rixon's comments there at the end, yeah, the whole intention of the Change Works analysis is that we'll be able to present that back to the Future Housing and Property Committee and have a real evidence-based focus. It's really difficult at the minute because as energy standards keep on changing, it's almost like a moving the goalposts as such. So we're really hoping that having that evidence-based approach will inform some of the decision making for the future. I trust that's all the questions answered there.
Thank you, Brian. I think this is the first time that we've had housing present to the group here. We will be expecting you back with the progress report, and we do hope that you'll be able to speed things up. Perhaps with the whole house approach, we can actually see some movement on this. And we are well aware of the difficulties, but the whole climate change agenda is a huge challenge for all of us. And we really need to see housing pick the pace up here a wee bit on this and I think members would agree with me on that. We haven't seen enough progress at the moment, and we really need to do it. It's not something that we can just say it's difficult to do. We really have to get moving on this, and we need to do it quickly. So we look forward to you coming back with a bigger progress report later. And please be assured that we are aware of the challenge that's there, but it's a challenge that we have to meet and overcome. Thank you very much, Brian.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Brian.
Okay, that moves us on to the annual report under public bodies climate change duties, and Keith will be presenting this to us. And as members will be aware, this is Keith's last meeting with us. He is moving on to greener climes, let's say. We very much appreciate all the work that he has put in to get us to this point, and realise there's a lot more going on in the background as well that perhaps we are not aware of, and the frustrations that he has faced over the last few years in trying to get us to this point are not to be underestimated. But thank you very much for this, Keith, and I hope I haven't embarrassed you too much to let you go ahead and present this report. Thank you, Keith.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for your kind words. And just to say before I introduce the report, it's been an absolute pleasure working with you as members of this working group, and really very hopeful that given the interim arrangements that have been put in place now that I'm on my way, it will really help shift things forward significantly over the course of 2022. So I'll be watching from my new position with great interest, and hopefully we'll be able to influence things from a relative distance. But thank you all. Members, this paper sets out the Council's annual statutory report under the public body's climate change duties in respect of our performance for the reporting year 2020-2021. And by way of background, the reporting process is designed to capture all the actions which have been undertaken in respect of both climate change mitigation and adaptation, as well as efforts across all our services to deliver against the biodiversity and ecological emergency. So this year's return was submitted ahead of the reporting deadline of the 30th of November 2021 and has now been approved for homologation by E&I Committee. Remember, there's a lot of detail within this report, as you'll be well aware. It's been coming to this group for a number of years now. But the key takeaways are that our corporate emissions fell significantly over the course of 2020-2021 by over 8,200 tonnes of carbon dioxide, which does take account of the impact of staff working from home as well. In addition, works undertaken through the Salix Recycling Fund have delivered significant solar PV and LED lighting upgrades across the estate, which have further reduced our corporate carbon footprint and have generated savings which can be recycled into future projects. Members, you'll recall that a paper was presented to full council on the 9th of December, which set out some of the key next steps to better embed climate action corporately and to deliver a net zero strategy and action plan in the current financial year, the current year 2022. And those are summarised at pages 20 and 21 of your reports. And in addition to that, many of the key projects which are currently underway to reduce our corporate footprint, including the River Ness Hydro, will come on stream in 2022 and will be reported through this process next year. So just finally, you're all aware that this is a huge agenda. There's always going to be more to do, but I hope that the paper does clearly set out that we are performing well as a council and moving forward in the right direction. It does take an awful lot of effort across multiple teams to pull this paper together each year, and it would be remiss of me not to thank Joe Perry and Katie Andrews for all their hard work in getting us to this point, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Keith. Members, do we have questions for Keith? It's a very comprehensive report, and it has shown some progress, although we still have a bit to do on recycling, for example. Dennis.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you, Keith. As Chair's just said, very comprehensive. The only thing I was going to say is, can I draw attention to pages 57 to 58, where we're describing what we do or manage to do in schools, and just say I think that's something we could maybe amplify in the future. I'm really pleased to see the online game for the primary, the Energy Spark scheme, the Green Impact scheme, and so on. But the primary and secondary education delivery is done by Highland Council. It's within house, so to speak. The tertiary system has several representatives within Highland as well. And I just feel that this is particularly fertile ground. Children themselves are really keen on climate change. I'm told that some of the climate change panels within schools are fiercely autocratic and make sure that everybody abides by the rules. And I think that's great. But if I could just suggest that if we can build on what you're already doing there, I think that would be really good for the future. And the only other thing I would mention is that on page 60, there's a wee typo, which I have to admit that I first read as Inner Murray first. And in order not to add the paranoia felt by those of us who live in rural parishes, if that could be corrected to the Inner Murray Firth, I would be grateful. But I think you had already noticed that from the mark in the margin, and I hope you won't mind my drawing attention to that. The other thing is, Keith, thank you for all that you've done for this working group. I'm really conscious of just what a personal contribution you've made, and I wish you all the best. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thanks, Dennis. Councillor Loudon.
I think I'd echo the comments of my doppelganger, Councillor Rickson. I think we all appreciate the work that you've done, Keith, and I don't think anybody in the council was really happy to see you go. I know, you'll do well for the Highlands, I know, in your new role, and we'll look with interest as well at how you're getting on. It's great to see what I think is a really positive commitment from HIE, and we know that the links and the understanding of the work that we're trying to do will improve immeasurably from you being in your new role. So, what have I made of the report? Page 15, the chart, figure 1. Yeah, I'm never a big fan of y-axes that don't end in a 0. So I'm wondering if that one could be altered to go from 0 upwards. I think it looks slightly different. It looks like we're almost at 0, but in actual fact we're almost at 30,000. So if we can do that, I mean, it does show the dramatic reduction that there has been in carbon emissions over that period, and a lot of that is down to the work that you've done. So thank you for the reductions, and we hope that continues in future years. I know that in the last year, probably COVID had a bit to do with it. So it'll be interesting to see the following year to see whether the path is still downwards or whether it bounces back a bit. Page 18, again, there's some interesting detail provided there in the first chart, Fig 4, and you can see how the reduction has come about for different sectors and overall. So again, that's a positive. A big reduction in 2021, and again, is that a path, or is an about turn likely? On page 35, there's a breakdown of emission sources, and I found that quite interesting in terms of grid electricity for generation and for buildings and for street lighting. But also it shows the bigger challenges in terms of gas and oil, and also from biomass. There's quite a high level of usage of biomass, and I wondered if you wanted to comment on that. And then I had one comment on pages 37 and 38, generation, consumption and export of renewable energy. I just wondered, would it be possible to, because it's trying to do a few different things, generation, consumption, and export. I wasn't very sure of the split for generation and consumption, but I think it would be interesting to see that detailed in that chart in future years, if you're allowed to play about with a layout, because it could be it's a statutory requirement to present it in that way. And I think I've waffled on for long enough, so I better leave it at that. Good luck in your new job.
Thank you, Derek. Councillor Boyd, and then we'll come back to Keith.
Thank you, Chair. Keith, I've just got a comment. I don't actually have a specific question. Selfishly, I'm very sorry to know that you're going. We've spoken a few times, and your counsel will be missed by me and others, I'm sure. You're leaving a legacy here. We have a framework, I think, to develop a comprehensive programme moving forward, and I think we all appreciate that. I hope you will keep in touch, and I'll be watching, see what you do elsewhere as well. Interested. Thank you for everything, Keith.
Okay, Keith, have you got something to say on any of these?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'll take the questions in turn, and all really good points. And firstly, Dennis, thanks again for your kind words. I'm really very grateful, and it has been really a pleasure working with you over the past few years. So just in terms of schools, absolutely, we do need to do more, and I'm pleased to say that, you know, Katie Andrews, one of our climate change coordinators, is already doing quite a lot of work with Teach the Future and Learning for Sustainability to better embed a lot of climate change education within the school estate. And I think that there's a huge opportunity through the Energy Sparks initiative to really drill into the data that's available through the school estate to increase awareness and to increase engagement around how we manage energy within schools. So that's something that she's actively picking up and will be driven forward in 2022. And I'm thoroughly embarrassed that the Inner First hasn't been picked up and corrected for this report, but I will go back and make sure that that is amended for future reporting years. So I can only apologise. Councillor Loudon, in a very similar token, yeah, I really appreciate your kind words, and certainly I'll be pushing very strongly from my new role for much closer partnership working around the whole climate change agenda. I think it's fair to say that there's no danger any of our organisations will get to net zero without being much closer in terms of how we collaborate and work and support each other. So you certainly won't have heard the last from me, and I'll be looking forward to hopefully coming back to present to you all in the future in a slightly different guise. But yeah, thanks again. It's much appreciated. In terms of your comments, absolutely, in terms of page 15, the y-axis, I can make sure that that's amended and updated so that my successor doesn't have that issue with the graph for the coming reporting year. So I'll do that before I head off. In terms of page 18 and the analysis, I think that we've seen a big reduction in costs. There's no question around that as a result of the COVID pandemic. But indicative analysis for the coming year would suggest that that is going to go the other way. It does look like the increase in energy costs is going to come at a pretty bad time, particularly as we do largely or to whatever extent get back into the office. So we will likely see a big uptick in terms of energy costs over the coming year in particular, and likely to see a reversal in terms of staff travel as well. So it's just trying to keep an eye on that and for managers internally to monitor and manage it as best we can, but certainly having you know, a new interim manager in post as well as a new energy manager, we'll be able to better use the data that we have access to through our billing platforms to spread the message a little wider and clearer around where the biggest impact's coming from across the estate and try to mitigate that as best we can. And of course, the development of the net zero strategy over the coming year will really help in terms of ongoing energy management across the estate and to reduce our exposure to cost risk. In terms of the emission sources on pages 35 onwards, yeah, I mean, there's no getting away from it. The big challenge going forward is going to be getting our Scope 1 emissions, the use of fossil fuel heat, gas and oil down to zero. That's going to require a rolling programme of work, coupled with really taking a fabric first approach, which we kind of touched on in the previous item, making sure that, you know, the retained estate is brought up to standard before we then look at the conversion of heating systems over to low carbon alternatives, just so that we can minimise not just emissions but costs as well. And in terms of biomass, I mean, you will have noted, Councillor Loudon, that the emissions associated with the use of biomass are significantly lower than our traditional fossil fuels like gas and oil. So there has been a big carbon saving through the use of biomass, and albeit that you know, installations of new biomass units have generally stalled a little bit, and we're looking towards electrification of heat largely across the estate and a little bit further on, hopefully to hydrogen as well. In terms of the generation, consumption and export side of things, yeah, absolutely. I mean, how we present this data is relatively fixed in terms of what goes back to Scottish Government, but in terms of future reports, we can certainly drill into that in a bit more detail. And what I can go away and do is have a chat with our subject matter experts within the team to see what we can pull off of the monitoring tech that we've got in place for our renewable installations, and see if a future report could come back to the working group, which would drill into that in a bit more detail if that would be of interest to members. I think that was everything from yourself, Councillor Loudon. And yeah, Councillor Boyd, again, very grateful to you for your comments. Again, it's been a real pleasure to talk with you and work with you over the years, and in a similar vein, I wish you every success over the coming weeks and months, and look forward to speaking with you again in my new role. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Keith, for that. And Keith is not suggested there. We've got his replacement already chosen, and they've been working together to ensure a smooth transition. And Neil Osborne, who you've met from the hydrogen project, I think most of you will know him by now, will be filling in for Keith until we get the permanent situation sorted out. Thank you very much for that, Neil, and we look forward to working with you over the next few months.
Oh, you're on mute, Trish.
How did I manage that? Okay, Growing Our Future, item 7, and Kirsty Ellen is going to introduce this one for us. Kirsty?
Hi, thank you, Chair. The Community Empowerment Act Scotland places a duty on local authorities to produce a community food growing strategy. The papers today set out a draft strategy for Highland. This strategy seeks to ensure that communities in Highland are inspired, empowered and supported to grow their own food through community food growing initiatives. There is a breadth to community food growing, including allotments, community gardens, pocket orchards, school growing, and a range of scales and projects, from a small cluster of fruit trees on a roadside verge to a social enterprise run garden feeding dozens of families. I know that I don't have to mention all of the benefits of community food growing at this group, but I'll add that the awareness and interest in the benefits of community food growing within the community has been gathering momentum over the last few years, and has really been sparked as a result of the pandemic, as well as food supply chain issues, with many of the projects in Highland becoming active in the emergency food response that we've seen. So now is a very opportune time to be building our support at the Council to start and expand community food growing initiatives across Highland. The strategy has been developed over the course of the last 2 years, with some hiatus due to COVID, with a series of community consultations, councillor officer workshops, discussions with key partners, public feedback on the draft version, and a schools survey. We have developed an action plan that enables the implementation of the strategy, which will be reviewed annually with our partners. The action plan will help in tackling the main barriers for community growing projects in Highlands, such as access to land, navigating council processes, peer support and networking, and access to resources. It will also aid council objectives in our health and prosperity strategy, climate change response and adaptation, community empowerment, and addressing inclusion inequalities. Some of the key actions are outlined within the report, many of which require a cross-departmental working at the council and with planning partnerships in order to be successful, as well as partnership working with external partners such as the Highland Good Food Partnership, Green Health Partnership and community groups. and High Life Highland also have a key role to play in aiding its delivery with actions involving libraries and youth leadership. Within the papers is guidance to accompany the strategy, which we've produced to be used by community groups and other council officers who work with community groups. This signposts to other sources of support locally and nationally, information and advice on teams within the council that can offer support and how to make contact with them, as well as highlighting several projects across Highland as case studies, showing their successes and challenges so that groups in earlier stages can benefit from their learning. We've also produced a design brief which shows how the strategy will be branded. This is initial guidance and will be added to as the implementation of the strategy progresses. Members, today you are being asked for your comments on the draft strategy, action plan and accompanying guidance to support finalising the strategy. Following this, the final version of the strategy will be produced for decision at the Communities in Place Committee on the 23rd of February. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsty. It's good to see the good guidance on where to go for advice to get started as well. That's been a problem over many years for folk, where they often get stumped at that first hurdle where they just don't know how to get started. And I'm glad to see a lot of guidance in there on that. Let me see now, who have I got to make comments on this one? First of all is Dennis, please.
Thanks so much, Chair. And firstly, Kirsty, thank you very much indeed for the report. There's a huge amount in here, and I really was interested to see the case studies. If I can make some brief points, firstly, I think you make a really important point about local food composting, and I think there's a greater thirst for that in some of our communities, food waste collection and so on. And I think that's something moving forward if we can build on. Secondly, I think you make some really important points about providing background information, particularly about growing permissions. In other words, who you need to contact, what permissions you need to get. I think that's really helpful. On page 134, when we're talking about the questions that you might ask, I do think that for question 3, perhaps we could have some notes to help local groups about certain issues such as better and worse locations for things like community food growing. And in particular, thinking here about aspect, as well as shelter and drainage and so on. And I think it's good for any groups who are embarking on these projects to think about those at the earliest possible opportunity. But the thing that I really want to talk about is on pages 71 to 72, where we're talking about food growing as a green health initiative. And of course, we're all aware of more in the context of social prescribing, mental health, therapy, and all these sorts of things. And Chair, if I may, I'm going to take this as an invite to get on my historical hobby horse here. And the reason I say that is that we've got something like 5 substantive items on the agenda today, and in every single one of them, officers have had to challenge themselves as to whether or not there are any Gaelic implications in anything we're doing. And in each case, the answer has been no. And I absolutely agree, but I think there could be. And the reason I say that is that for many years, there was a lady called Mary Beath who used to write a weekly column in the West Highland Free Press, talking about health and drawing on the Gaelic medical tradition, the plant and herb growing in the Highlands and so on. And it was an absolutely huge repository of local and Highland culture and law and medical help. There is also from the early 16th century a Gaelic medical treatise associated with a family of Beatons who were famous doctors. It's got a Latin title, Regimen Sanitatis. I've brought this up in the context with the Inverness Castle development, and they're certainly aware of this sort of Gaelic tradition, and they're talking about it in terms of the herb garden or potentially a herb garden in the castle and so on. And it's deeply embedded in Highland culture. So, for instance, all the islands off the northwest coast of Sutherland were assigned to the doctors. And kindreds, not just the Earls of Ross, but some of the other kindreds, Monroes of Fowles and so on, had doctors associated with particular families and associated with particular lands. And finally, I would say we share an eco. The eco who has climate change under their wing also has Gaelic under their wing. And I just feel this is an ideal opportunity to see if we can develop synergies between 2 halves of what Highland does. We do want to tackle climate change, but equally well, we have a tradition. We have both a language tradition and we also have a historical and cultural tradition. And if we can use them to boost each other, I would really welcome that. Chair, forgive me for being on my hobby horse. It's just something that I think we can promote to advantage of both parties. Thank you very much, Chair.
Very interesting, Dennis, but I really don't want to have to get to grips with the Latin names for the flowers and vegetables as well as the botanical ones. Councillor Loudon.
I'd like to thank you as well for the report. There's a lot of detail and a lot of information in there. But I'll maybe comment on slightly different things from Dennis, just for a bit of variety. I like the branding. You know, it looks attractive, and if yourself or whoever you've worked with on that is responsible, it looks really good. So I think that's attractive. I think the thing that kind of strikes me is, you know, there's a lot of areas in the Highlands where there's good quality land, but in a lot of areas there maybe isn't. There's maybe land that's been degraded over the centuries, as we've, you know, removed all the trees and failed to replant anything. So the quality of the soil can be quite low. And I'm wondering, I know that Joe is working on biochar, which is a bit of a hobby horse of mine as well. So I'm wondering if something like that could maybe be factored in to see whether we can improve crop husbandry by improving the quality of the soil, using something like that. And I'm hoping, you know, as well as it being a sort of academic exercise for Joe, maybe there's a kind of a practical implication of that we could help communities to grow better quality and better quality produce. And good luck. I hope it gets rolled out all over the Highlands. And I know that my own community have expressed an interest in this in the past, and I'm sure that they'll be keen to see this develop in the future. Thanks very much.
Okay, Kirsty.
Thank you both for your comments. Councillor Rickson, yes, I very much agree about us helping communities finding the right locations with the right conditions for growing. One of the actions is to produce an asset map of the council-owned land that could be made available for community food growing. At the moment, we're working on mapping that. We have an officer working on that for looking at all of our green spaces for suitability for community food growing and biodiversity enhancement. An aspect is on the list of the criteria that she's looking at. So as that comes together, what we'll hopefully have is an interactive map that the community, anybody can have a look at. They can look at their own communities and see what council land might be possible to be used for community food growing, and some of the conditions of that land, like what kind of aspect or slope or services might be available for projects there. So we'll hopefully make it a little bit easier at the beginning to see what could be made available, and people won't be scratching their heads about who owns that bit of land or not. And that's something that I'm already trying to work on with groups as they come to us, sort of thinking through things like that as we're looking at sites and suitability of sites that the council own. And I agree also with Green Health. It's really an important thing to include in this strategy. And thank you as well for your comments on the Gaelic implications and the embedding within the culture. That's just really interesting, and it hadn't occurred to me to think about it in that way. So thank you for that. Councillor Loudon, the branding, I have to give credit to Kirsty Foster in our corporate communications team. That's been her piece of work, and yeah, thank you very much. I'm glad to see that we'll have it as a branding, and it feels very like it's come together within that. So yeah, thank you for your comments. And again, on soil quality and degradation, I think there is an important part of that, and there's many communities in the Highlands that have got poor access to land, and they have to take what they can get when it comes to what sites they can use for community food growing. So there will be challenges for different communities as they set up projects. So it's good to think about it in terms of what we've learned in other parts of the council that we could help benefit those groups with. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kirsty, for that. Now at this point, members, I'd like to introduce a wee idea to you that's been floated around at the moment. You may be aware that tree planting has not really been taken up on such a scale as we would like in Highland over the last 3 years. And there is an opportunity which has been suggested and has had nationwide publicity, which is the Queen's Green Canopy, which is a unique tree planting initiative for the Platinum Jubilee, which you'll all agree is quite an astounding achievement to maintain in a position for 70 years. And as it has a focus on planting sustainability, it should encourage planting of trees all over the nation. And we did wonder whether there would be an appetite for doing something as a council on this, but it's maybe got a little bit bigger than I had anticipated, in that we're looking at perhaps 70 trees in each ward, so that it covers the whole of Highland, which would give a nice little forest in each ward throughout the whole of Highlands. We just wondered what the opinion was on whether to take that forward. Derek.
That'll be really good. Keith Masson would be thinking he escaped there, but I wondered that one thing that I did raise with them that we didn't manage to progress was one on exactly that, tree planting and at scale. So and there was a source of funding, which perhaps was the controversial bit of the idea. So I don't know if Keith has any comment on that, but certainly in terms of planting trees, yes, I'm always. I think Councillor Rickson probably is going to follow me. We have been a double act on the need to plant more trees, and I'm pretty certain. Dennis will be saying the same. I'm very supportive of the idea.
Thank you, Derek. Dennis?
It appalls me that I'm so predictable, Chair, but yes, anything to do with planting trees absolutely has my vote. And as a slight bias comment there, Malek High School was opened in 1989, and the then biology teacher made sure we planted some trees around the edges. And at the time, they were tiny little things, foot and a half high. They're monstrous now and wonderful. I mean, they're the only trees in Malek, because goodness knows we're windswept here. But it's wonderful what you can do as long as you take the long view. Now, in the question of where and what trees, I'm entirely open. I can see the possibility of little mini orchards, and I leave that to Kirsty and officers to give us feedback as to where those have been successful elsewhere. I do quite like the idea of trees being useful for a community, and fruit for young boys in particular was always a charm. So I sort of tend to feel if we've got fruit trees bearing fruit, it's going to interest the kids, and that's maybe bodes well for the future. But I'm entirely open, Chair, on the actual details. But yes, Derek is absolutely right. You have my vote for trees. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Boyd.
Thank you, Chair. And Kirsty, I'd just like to add my support for trees to that. I live not far from the centre of the city, in fact, not far from HQ, and it's a large flatted area. And we've got a wee copse that was planted originally when the buildings were put up. I've had a wee bit of a struggle. No, not me, just me. Me and my colleagues have had a bit of a struggle defending that little copse against being thinned and cut and chopped up and thrown away because of the inconvenience, would you believe it, of leaf drop and having to clean it up and that sort of thing. Now, we've overcome that stage, and I have been thinking about how we can move forward and be a bit more constructive. I think even within the city, where space is constrained, there are opportunities. I've been looking out for them, and I'd like to work with you on that going forward. If it can be orchards, all the better, but I mean, the ones I'm talking about just now are really just decorative, but they still need to be preserved. And until it's pointed out to people, some people, that it's important and it's part of our way forward, and a little copse makes a contribution, it's still got to be done. So I would like to work with you on that going forward. I'm looking forward to that. Thank you for your report, Kirsty. Great. Keep it up.
I'd just like to let you know that this came out of an idea that I heard, because I heard that we were planting one at Ness Hydro and one in the city centre to commemorate this thing. And I thought, 2 trees, that's nowhere near enough. Keith, have you got a comment on this?
Yeah, just very briefly, I think it's a fair point, Councillor Loudon, and it's something we've certainly struggled with. I mean, it's one thing planting trees within our own estate, which we've got control over. When we look wider across the region, that's another beast entirely. But to try and alleviate some of those pressures and to start expediting some planting, Joe's been working quite hard in the background to establish a kind of carbon management group of like-minded partners who could come together and really shift that agenda forward at pace. And whilst we've not, formally agreed to that as yet, there is a real willingness and an understanding that to really make this happen, it is going to take a partnership effort, as I touched on earlier. So things are moving in the background. I'd like to think that over the course of the coming year, they'll move forward at a bit more pace, which we all need to see. So yeah, I'm sure Joe will be happy to come back to a future meeting and report on that. Sorry, Joe.
Thanks.
Giving work out still, even though he's not gone yet. Yeah, make sure we keep going. Thanks very much, Keith. And thank you, Kirsty, for your report. Thanks. And we look forward to lots more community projects all over the Highland that will come out of this once they know how to go about it. So members, we're doing very well today. On to item 8, Highland Adapts. And Emma Whittam's going to start this one off for us. Hi, Emma.
Hi, morning everybody. Thanks for having me along to give you a wee update on Highland Adapts. I'm just going to share my screen, run through a few slides and bring you up to speed to where this project's at. I've turned my camera off because sometimes my Wi-Fi struggles with sharing and looking at and my camera at the same time. So, climate change adaptation in Highland. I think I'm just going to start off by taking the opportunity to remind everybody that adaptation is really, really important. We as a country and as a region have most of our focus to date has been on mitigation, about getting to net zero. But even if we got to net zero tomorrow, we would still have to be planning and adapting for climate change that's built into the system. So climate change adaptation, sadly, is actually really, really important. And that's where the motivation behind this initiative has come from. Next slide shows all the different partners behind Highland Adapts. So there's one key person, and because it is this last climate change working group, we cannot escape the fact that this initiative would not have existed if it had not been for Keith pushing forward this whole agenda. And before I was in post, he managed to rally around these other organisations to put money in a pot and convince them that working together in some collaborative effort towards getting Highland climate ready was the way forward. So I actually work for all of these partners and then report back to this board. I know some of you will know this from the update we gave you in April or May it was last year, but I thought it was just really kind of important to emphasise that this is a partnership. And all of these partners have really kind of bought into the concept that we have to work together. So a key thing that I really like to emphasise about Highland Adapts is that it is a place-based climate change adaptation initiative with community needs at the absolute heart of it. And that's something I really want to hope sticks because that's a really significant kind of part of what we're trying to do. And the purpose of the initiative is to bring our communities, businesses, land managers and public sector together to facilitate a transformational action towards a prosperous and climate-ready Highland. Sorry, it's not the loveliest of slides, but here are our 10 guiding principles. And the key points to take away from these are, this is all about transformational action. We're going to have to be brave and we're going to have to prioritise action. Collaboration is the key. And there are already lots of brilliant initiatives and projects that work across the Highland region, and Highland Adapts is committed to working with others to add value to what is already happening and to work with key players to achieve better, more holistic outcomes all round. The foundation of all our work will be both evidence-based and place-based, and all our actions that come out of this initiative will be sustainable and in line with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Now, our work is deep-rooted and a deep understanding of the needs and the priorities of communities, with climate and social justice at the heart of everything that we do. The objectives of the initiative are to build up the evidence base, work with the subject experts and communities to develop detailed climate risk assessments, and then identify key actions to support the public, private and community sectors to design, invest and implement the priority projects. Now here's a picture of our model. And the points here I want to kind of emphasise is that Highland Adapts requires everybody to get involved, and our structure is inclusive and is designed in a way to enable all voices to be heard with strong lines of accountability, communication and support. And this model that you see here is really based on the value of shared power. Each of the green hexagons that you see represent a thematic team that we've set up to drive forward this partnership. And they're made up of a wide range of partners. So you had that core that core 8 that I showed on the second slide. A representative from each of those partner organisations sit on the programme board, and then we've got a 9th member who is Joan Laurie from the North Highlands and Islands Climate Hub, sit on there representing the community side. To give you a bit of an idea what the other teams are working on, I'll go through each of them. So our data and assessment team, they're working with the Tyndall Centre for Climate Research to scope out the methodology for the Highland risk assessment. We started at the beginning of the year working with a PhD student on that, and we have a series of workshops planned in February to work with a range of stakeholders of around 18 different organisations, from the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service to SEPA, and from Transport Scotland to NHS Highland. And the idea for these workshops is to gather data that partners already have that will be relevant to the Highland climate risk assessment, and also identify questions that organisations need answers to regarding their planning and their investment going forward in terms of climate change projections and risks. Our climate advocates team, they're a group of people that are representing organisations and networks that are advocating for climate in the community, and we have our councillor Angela McLean, and this working group represents the councillors. Angela's just joined this group, but certainly I think that councillors have a massive role of advocating for climate in the community, so it's brilliant to have Angela on board and the support from Councillor Trish in terms of through this working group. So a couple of things, tangible things that this group are working on. They're drafting up a climate and environment charter for Highland, and they are also working on a green youth leadership programme, working in partnership with High Life Highland and Regmore psychiatry team, looking at ways to address the increase in climate anxiety that we find within our young people, and developing nature-based solutions to that. We've got a bit of a funding application just going in on Monday for working with researchers on that as well, which is quite exciting. The engagement team, this is people from all different organisations in Highland that are doing place-based planning to make sure that we're having a joined-up approach to that. So that's a space for people to be discussing what they're doing and making sure that we can be having the climate lens on those planning processes, which is great. There's a couple of things that we're specifically working on just now, which is in Allnice and Invergordon, we're working on a climate action town initiative with Architecture and Design Scotland. Done a couple of workshops there the back end of last year, with another workshop scheduled for Tuesday of next week. And the idea there is the Climate Action Town Initiative is Allnice and Invergordon are 2 of 7 towns across Scotland.
All things that we're doing.
Oops. Oh, sorry, I'll just keep going. I don't know what happened there. Sorry, I've lost my track there. So yeah, the Climate Action Town Initiative is run by Architecture and Design Scotland, and we've got 2 of the 7 towns in Scotland there, and they're basically practicing and trialling different methodologies to engage people in place-based processes to generate climate change action on the ground. As I say, I've gone off on a wee bit, lost my track there. We're also currently have a funding application in to fund a researcher to develop place-based methodology to complement the Tyndall Open Clim project that I mentioned just a minute ago when we were looking at our risk assessment. Then we've got the strategic adaptation team, and a couple of things there to highlight would be that next week we have the first business climate gathering meeting, and that is chaired by, going to be chaired by Stuart Black from High. And that's basically, we've got our Chambers of Commerce, our Federation of Small Businesses, our Social Enterprise Network, and our tourism sector, and many others. The Cairngorms have got a rep in there as well. Anybody that's sort of got a network of businesses and providing that business support to see how we can support businesses in their climate journey. And we're also, that team is working on developing a senior leadership summit for the spring, which I won't go into too much detail about that just now, but that's something to look forward to perhaps in the spring. The action planning team, just by the nature of this initiative, has only been going since the summer. There's not a lot happening on the ground because we've been putting all this governance structure together and building up these teams. But we are in the middle of writing up 2 applications. One for the Nature Restoration Fund that Nature Scot has, which we're looking at to see if we can address an issue that's highlighted in the Highland Biodiversity Action Plan. And see if we can work with them to do that. And then we're also, another thing I'm working on is with Home Energy Scotland to see if there's a project we can put together that would be addressing fuel poverty, and that would be the Investing in Communities Fund. Again, don't know if we'll get these, but that's the kind of thing that we're trying to do, is bring people together, different organisations together to try and address the wider issues. Got a comms team that work with everybody. They're in the middle of putting together a website. Katie, who is on the climate change coordinator, works on this team and is driving this forward. With that, we'll have a social media campaign, and then we're working with the Highland Climate Hub and other partners to develop a Highland Climate Festival in the summer. We've currently got in the middle of a recruitment process of trying to get an intern graduate to help join the Highlands Adapts team, and one of the things would be to drive forward this climate festival. There's reps from all these different teams that then sit on the core team, and it's that core team that is the mechanism for driving forward Highland Adapts and delivering the objectives and making sure that everybody knows what everybody else is doing. And so far, so good. I'm just going to finish up on this slide, which is kind of adding a bit more detail to something I've already mentioned. You might have come across in your own and work already that we've got a climate hub in Highland now, run by the Thurso Development Trust. Up until March, that was covered in North Highlands and the North Isles, but we've been doing a lot of work. Well, Joan has been doing a lot of work with the Scottish Government to show them how well this hub could work in line with Highland Adapts, to almost be that community link on the ground, the mechanism for delivering and supporting community action. And so the geography of that initiative has now been extended to cover the whole of Highlands, which fully complements the Highland Adapts area as well. And I would just like to emphasise there that we're absolutely utterly working in neat partnership with the hub, and I think that Highland Adapts is going to be able to achieve a lot more and a lot sooner, simply because we've got a massive, well, I was going to say massive, I think it's about 6 to 8 staff base now in the Climate Hub that is going to be there to support climate action on the ground. So absolutely super. And then I've included an Architecture and Design Scotland in this little diagram, because these three initiatives are working sweetly in that area to try and identify with the community what the risks are, what the opportunities are, and then the mechanism to then help the community on their journey with that. So we're in a really, really unique position here in Highland to have these 3 initiatives, and we're certainly being watched from afar to see how we can make it all work, which really is super exciting for us. So I hope that gives you a wee bit of a flavour for what's happening in Highland Adapts in its sort of first 6-7 months, if you like. And now I'll stop sharing my screen, and really happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Emma. That's really good to hear, to see all these strands coming together to the united cause should give us a bit more strength to get going. And it shows members just how far we've come over the last couple of years. With quite a small team, it still is quite a small team, but a power of work has been done by them all. And I'll turn to members for comment. Dennis, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Emma. And I, first of all, appreciate that at the moment you've been busy setting up the structure, and absolutely appreciate that. And, you know, there's a lot of time ahead when actions will take place. My question really is a sort of open-ended rhetorical one, and I don't need an answer here and now, I would stress, but it is something which I think is sort of an area that I would hone in on. A lot of the questions which you will be asked in the future will be very practical ones, and I noticed some sort of similarities with the previous item on our agenda here. You know, people will be looking for practical advice on things like permissions and where to get help and so on. So that will be one factor. But in particular, can I hone in on principle 3, which is how do we articulate this place-based, bottom-up and inclusive approach? Now, I'm absolutely for that. I'm involved in one of our locality plans here and so on. And I noticed also that there are potential sources of funding with the place-based investment funds, which have been rolled out to area committees over the last couple of years. But I'm also aware of the fact that we have community support workers. Now, we're lucky in Loch Harbour. We have an absolutely wonderful community support worker who's deeply embedded in the community, knows all the sort of aspirations and the little groups that are going on there, and is very able at bringing these to council and telling us about all the things that are going on. But those posts are only for 1 year. So they will actually be ending in a few months' time, as I understand it. And it's just an open-ended question of how we articulate and embed this bottom-up inclusive approach as we go forward, if it's not the case that we have, funded officers in place whose job it is to help local areas put forward such ideas. Many thanks indeed, Chair, but all more power to you. I think it's great. Thank you.
Emma?
Thanks, Councillor Rickson. And I also meant to say in that presentation that your ideas about Gaelic, going back to Kirsty's presentation, we are incorporating Gaelic into the Highland Adapts comms. So when we're doing the climate literacy training, we're also working with partners across Scotland to be developing Gaelic climate literacy training, which is actually really interesting because it's not just a translation. It's incorporating the difference in the culture. And I think there's actually a lot to learn from the Gaelic culture in terms of people's relationship to place and to land. So I'm really hoping that in our journey going forward in terms of our climate change communication engagement that we can celebrate the wider Gaelic culture in that, not necessarily just the language. So I really like the fact that you highlighted that when you were speaking to Kirsty. There's an amazing amount of information out there for people, and I think that something that Highland Adapts has the opportunity to do well is to create a one-stop shop for that and signposting different people on different things. So we're in the process of putting together our website, working with all our partners and trying to create that space where people, if they are looking for climate change information in Highland, that's where they go, and then that website will then direct them and support them to other organisations. So that's also a really good point. I think the whole place-based approach is really, really interesting. I think it's absolutely and utterly imperative that anything that we do is absolutely place-based, and that we are working with people in their communities to develop and grow them in a way that's where they want to be going and that's right for them. So I don't think anybody needs convinced on that, but the mechanisms for doing it are what are difficult. You're right. And the small amount of place-based stuff that we've already been doing, and if I would pick Holness and Invergordon as the example to show there, the community support coordinator has been absolutely crucial in that, as well as working with the ward manager, because they've got the on-the-ground knowledge. We might have the ideas and the theories and the methodologies, but they've got the on-the-ground knowledge of who the businesses are, who the community groups are, and who the key players are to be speaking with. And the success of that initiative so far wouldn't be what it is if it weren't for those two people, Helen and Val, up in Allnice and Invergordon, for absolute sure. So if I ever had an opportunity to try and support the future role of these community support coordinators, and I'd be very, very keen to do that. What's interesting in the Highland Adapts engagement team is that from Highland third sector interface to Highlands Enterprise to various different teams within the Highland Council, including CLD and education and planning, they're all doing place-based planning. So what we've got that space for them all to come together, that we can be learning from each other and adding value to what each other is already doing. So people have place-based embedded in their work and their thoughts already. So it's building on that as well. And just to finish off on the place-based thing, is that the whole idea of working, well, not the whole idea, but a main idea of working with Architecture and Design Scotland is for us to be practicing different methodologies for place-based work, and we can be learning from that. And secondly, as I was saying also in that presentation, we've got a funding bid in for a researcher to work with us to see how we can be doing place-based planning to complement the risk assessment that we're doing through Open CLIM. And yeah, I just think we keep pushing the agenda as much as we can, Councillor Dixon, but thanks for your comments.
There's no other councillors wishing to comment on that, so thanks very much for that report, Emma. It really shows how we're starting to move forward, and we'll look forward to the actions coming on behind that. Thank you very much, Emma. Okay, members, we move to the last item on the agenda, number 9, and it's a report about the conference, and I think Katie Andrews is going to do this for us. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members, for giving me the opportunity to introduce the paper on the Highland Climate Change Conference of 2021. So this paper provides an overview of the conference and its associated workshops, which took place virtually on Thursday the 21st and Friday the 22nd of October. And it attracted over 200 people from across both days from all over Highland and beyond. So the conference provided a timely and significant opportunity to bring people together to discuss and propose local solutions to the climate and ecological emergency, especially in the lead up to COP26. So firstly, the paper outlines the extensive preparation which went into the conference. The climate change and energy team identified and agreed 4 key themes, which were energy, land and sea, net zero and resilient communities. Once these themes were confirmed, the team contacted over 100 different potential participants, ranging from politicians to community activists. And the team worked with the Council's corporate communications team to ensure communications leading up to the event were consistent and the agenda was accurate. I cannot stress enough the incredible support and dedication the team provided us, especially Duncan McKenzie and Kirsty Foster. The topics and conference speakers are all highlighted in the report, but to give you a little bit of an overview, each day of the conference began with a welcome by the Council's climate change coordinators, myself and Joe Perry, followed by a keynote speech relevant to the specific theme being discussed. We were delighted to attract the high caliber keynote speakers, including Drew Hendry, Ariane Burgess, Mary McCallan, and also Richard Lockhead. Their eagerness to participate in the conference underlined how Highland is viewed as a focal point for the fight against climate and ecological emergency. The first theme was energy, which explored the emerging technologies which will help the energy industry reach net zero in Highland. And the second theme on day 1 was land and sea, which explored the connection between healthy habitats and healthy climates, as well as highlighting some important ongoing projects. Following on from the success of day 1, day 2 started with the net zero theme, which examined what net zero actually means and explored how we can achieve it within Highland. And the final theme of the conference was resilient communities, which aimed to celebrate the positive work already being undertaken across Highland and beyond to tackle the climate and ecological emergency. Each theme represented a different challenge and opportunity for Highland, and the range of speakers helped provide a vital steer for the subsequent workshops. So to give it a little overview of the workshops provided an opportunity to speak to Highland residents and gather their concerns or aspirations for the region. Over the 2 days, the Climate Change and Energy team hosted 4 workshops, 1 for each theme. Each workshop was extremely interesting, and with individuals sharing best practices and contributing solutions, local solutions for local problems. However, it did provide an insight into how Highland residents could be better supported by the Council, including improved communication around the climate and ecological agenda. They recognised the important role of the Council to lead by example, as well as its role to educate and raise awareness of the challenges facing Highland. The report you have been provided with provides a comprehensive overview of the discussion points and the potential action points for the Council going forward into the new year. The final section of the paper looks at the feedback from this conference and the outcomes, and looks forward to the 2022 conference. The paper outlines the feedback from this year's conference, which was extremely positive. During each workshop, verbal responses were gathered, and the team also pulled together a short survey for attendees to submit their feedback after the event. Of people who completed the survey, over 60% said the conference was excellent or very good. The workshops were another success, with over 83% of survey respondents rating them excellent or very good. All responses are highlighted in the report provided. So looking forward to the 2022 conference, we aim to build on the positive momentum of 2021. More people are willing to take part in these conversations, and we want to harness that growing energy around the agenda and feed it into a more wide-reaching conference. Attendees who took part in the survey indicated a preference for a hybrid event, so both digital and in-person elements. This would be something that would need to be investigated, and practicalities will need to be factored into that decision. To conclude, Jo and I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone who contributed to the 2021 conference. It was an absolute honour to host the event and share so many Highland voices. And thank you to everyone who has helped pull together this, and a special thanks to Keith and our corporate communications team and graphic design team. It was a positive and proactive conference which aimed to inspire people to take action in their community, workplace, or individually. And the team and I look forward to preparing for the 2022 conference and have the objective to make it even more engaging for people in Highland and beyond. Again, thank you for giving me the opportunity to introduce this paper to the working group, and myself and Jo welcome any questions you might have. Thank you.
That's super, Katie. Thank you very much. And remember to give thanks to both you and Jo as well for all the hard work you put into it. It was quite hard being on the spot all day long as well during the actual conferences for 2 whole days as well. Well done, both of you. Councillor Loudon, please.
Yeah, I think I'd echo the comments of the chair there. Really, you know, there's some things you don't really know what kind of level that the council are operating at. Are we soaring like eagles, or are we kind of crawling around on the ground and failing to take off? But I think this really has taken off. You know, I got the impression that everything had been well thought through. Everything was really well delivered, and I think it creates a really positive impression of the council for everybody in the Highlands, and you know, a lot wider than that. I think people across Scotland took on board what you were doing, and at the climate change conference as well, you were given the opportunity to highlight some of the things that the council was doing. So yeah, I'm looking forward to next year's one already. And you know, if there's anything I can do to help you in any way, I'd be only too happy to be asked.
Thank you. Councillor Fraser, please.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. Yeah, I was one of the speakers then. I'm going to be a bit selfish, in so much as it gave me an opportunity to promote the Scottish pollinator strategy, because most people have never even heard of that. Also gave me the platform to promote the species champions, which I really think not every council, if I'm being critical, has taken on board. Yes, they say they're going to be a species champion for XYZ, but then they really don't do anything about it. And I took a different view because of pollinators. We need to get that message out to a wider audience. And in fact, we don't know who actually watches these, but I did have an email from a community council over on the other side of Inverness, saying, "Are you the guy that spoke about the bumblebees?" So that set up a different train of conversation, because the community council wanted to actually do gardening for pollinators. And so it gives a platform to people that you wouldn't necessarily appreciate. And it's when you do get feedback. I mean, the amount of effort that went into this is something else, really. And a lot of this time was done on a volunteered basis. You did it because you wanted to, because you enjoyed it, and it was going to be rewarding. And this is what sometimes gets missed: the volunteers behind the scenes that put in the amount of effort to promote this. So generally, a very well done for the whole team there. And I forgot to say, Keith will be sadly missed by myself and others. Thanks, Catherine.
Thanks, Craig. Councillor Rickson.
Thanks, Chair. And Katie, thank you very much indeed. A couple of points if I can just endorse in your report, which I thought were really interesting. On section 7.7, you commented on deer management as having been raised as an issue. And can I just say how critical I think that is? In the previous item, we were talking about planting trees. Well, about 30 years ago, there was a tree planting scheme outside Mallaig. I think 99.9% of the trees were wiped out by deer predation within a year, and the other 0.1% was got rid of by muirburn, which is my other big source of angst. So it's been deer management has been an issue for decades, and it's never really been tackled. And if we're talking about planting trees and if we're talking about protecting the environment, we have to tackle deer management as well. So absolutely endorse what was said there. And I think it was actually an issue in one of the case studies in one of the earlier presentations, so that would be good. Muirburn, again, it's a word we seldom see these days. It's usually branded as wildfires, but muirburn it's legitimate practice, but it should only take place occasionally. And I think we have to be honest about this and make sure that it's on the agenda, so to speak. And the last thing I was going to say, under 7.9, you talk about support for communities outside Inverness on food waste. And I think that's a really important issue, and just like to highlight, it's easy for me to say what we should be doing, but of course there's always a cost issue. But I think if we can do more to promote and help that, it would be welcomed by communities outside Inverness. I know my daughter lives under another local authority in Scotland, and I think they have 7 bins, including 2 food waste ones. So some authorities can do it. I don't underestimate the difficulties in Highland with such small and sparsely populated communities, but it's just something to draw attention to. But a lot of really good stuff. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dennis. Katie, do you have anything else you want to add?
Yes, just to come back on the points, thank you so much for your positive feedback. We're so glad that it was well received, and everyone saw the hard work that went into it from the entire team as well as the full council. So just coming back to Councillor Loudon, thank you again for your positive thoughts, and we will definitely be taking you up for that offer of support, just to try and make it as wide-reaching as we can and engaging for all participants across Highland. And then Councillor Fraser, in terms of the pollinator strategy and giving you that platform to be able to raise awareness, that's what the conference is all about. It's about empowering people and giving people that platform to share their work, and we basically to reflect on more actions that we'll look at the ecological side of the emergency at this year's conference and add a bit more on that element onto the agenda. But we recognise the hugely important role of pollinators in positively contributing to our climate change response. And then coming to Councillor Rickson, obviously with the deer management, we'll definitely add that to the agenda going forward for this year's, and it will be important to sort of bring in that relevant subject matter expert from Nature Scot to represent those issues. In terms of the food waste, I'm actually involved in various conversations around the food waste agenda, and I'm working with Highlands and Islands Enterprise, and I think I touched on it at the conference. That's progressing, and we have the commission from Zero Waste Scotland for a decision tree. So I'm actually working with one of their representatives later today to progress that, and hopefully that will give a little bit more guidance to the people of Highland, that's not just in Inverness but Highland wide, and make it sort of a fair and just transition for that waste agenda. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Katie. It was an excellent conference, and we're all looking forward to the next one. Well, members, that brings us to the end of the agenda and the end of this particular incarnation of the Climate Change Working Group. I think I'd like to thank all the officers for all the work they've done in getting us to the point that we're at the moment, and I think we've set it up fine for the new council to take it up again after May. So it's been good to work with you all, and I've quite enjoyed doing this, and I'm really glad that we're at the position we're at, and look forward to the actions on the ground coming up in the future. And good luck to all the officers in continuing to move this agenda forward. Thank you all for your attendance today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all.
Thanks.